Gurmagat is more nor dum ben shonacht sin gleonte tam in your mentioned on redig noch I wasn't here the last time I was in Glenties was 1991. My apologies. I was not married at the time, but I was in love with one of still am actually in love with one of Ireland's amazing actresses, who was in a production of Dancing at Lunasa by Brian Friel, and I had the job one day of taking a phone call from Joe Mulholland in '91, who persuaded Noel Pearson, who was my boss at the time, who ran the Abbey Theatre, to take a production of Dancing at Lunasa to the community hall, to the comprehensive school, and I took a walk up there this morning. It's changed mightily since 1991. It was a wonderful evening, jammed hall, and I stood at the outside in the car park and just watched this chimera, this glowing light, as Brian Friel's amazing play by 5 amazing women and 3 men in the play before it went off to Broadway. I think we got 3 of the actors from the Abbey and 2 of the actors from who were playing in the West End, wasn't it, at the time? We brought them in, and it was kind of around this time in '91, and then it opened in Broadway in October '91, and I got married the following June. So anyway, that's my tenuous connection. One other person who who's not here with us, who I had a great time with, spent a lovely time with, and held my girlfriend's hand too tightly for too long, was Malachy McCluskey, who unfortunately is not with us. But Malachy would be another memory of mine here, and I just want to acknowledge that. I thought for one second there Mary Cloak was going to talk about the common factor between Joe Mulholland and Michael Jackson was that Joe Mulholland might have a monkey, but obviously he doesn't, you know. So really, on his back, yeah. Today's debate, there was a couple of quotes I was trying to put together, and Joe encouraged me to start with one quote, which is Jean Monnet, who is the founder of the European ideal, the notion of an integrated Europe, a diverse Europe, but a united Europe. And he said that if he was to start all over again, he would start with culture. And I think often in times of crisis and times of jeopardy, culture is left aside and ignored, and actually to the detriment of society. And I suppose it's a challenging topic that we need to discuss this evening. As director of the Abbey Theatre over the last 4 years, I've been continually mindful of the idea and the legacy of the Irish Republic, and how the Abbey can and still should engage with it. 4 years ago, this was seen as an almost old-fashioned notion, and I then started to use the word citizen, which raised even more eyebrows. I have committed the Abbey Theatre to supporting the role and place of the citizen in the Republic, and how art and politics can and must engage with each other in Irish society. However, I found institutional resistance to this in many quarters, and of course at the height of the Celtic Tiger boom time, discussions of nation, state, language, culture, creativity, art were so commodified as to be parcels of saleable goods for the axis between Boston and Berlin. The Abbey Theatre is Ireland's national theatre and existed prior to independence and the formation of the Irish Republic. Without going into details, at various times in its history, the Abbey had to fight and argue for the title of National Theatre. Sometimes this was done out of inaction by the Abbey itself, and particularly during the 1970s and 1980s, or sorry, 1960s and 1970s, it wielded its monopolistic power to the detriment of playwrights and theatre artists, and of course audiences. Quite rightly, the growth of the independent theatre sector arose out of this, and we now have the work of Druid, the Passion Machine, Project Art Centre, Rough Magic and other companies to celebrate. This does not mean that the role of the National Theatre is redundant. As we know, a lot of companies are built around an individual artist or writer, be that Gary Hines at Druid or Michael Colgan at the Gate. The Abbey has a different and national responsibility, and that is to constantly interrogate and engage with Irish society. When I became director of the National Theatre, I promised that one of my primary aims at the Abbey was to re-engage with Irish society and its politics and its community. The Abbey has been remiss about this in the past. I felt that it was my responsibility was to the artist as citizen and to the audience as community. It wasn't a fashionable thing to do 4 years ago, but I strongly believe that the act of putting on a play at the Abbey Theatre is a political act. We developed a series of public events, forums, discussions, and we placed the work of Brian Friel, Tom Murphy, William Shakespeare, Sam Shepard, Mark O'Rourke, Sebastian Barry in a context where over time and incrementally the Abbey is in a position to support and provide an imaginative, cultural and political service to our citizens. We have had oppositions to this re-emergence of the role of the Abbey Theatre as Ireland's national theatre, not least from some board members of the Arts Council and from some of our colleagues within the theatre community. Yet whether I like it or not, the Abbey has a responsibility to continue to fulfil the ambition of the founders of Yeats, Lady Gregory and Synge. The economic crisis we are experiencing now shouldn't be about settling old scores or exercising prejudices, but is a brilliant opportunity to reassess the cultural, social, political and economic value of our culture and our republic. Whatever we might think of the report of the special group on the public services numbers and expenditure programmes, that's a long title, I will ask the Minister today, and I'm glad I've heard soundings from the Minister today, to keep the arts portfolio at the Cabinet table as a part of a senior ministry. The nation was founded by patriots, men and women who were thinkers, poets, artists and part-time soldiers. And throughout the emerging years of the Republic, the link between our politicians, policymakers and artists was very, very strong. Our proclamation itself is a work of real vision and imagination and was inspired and written by our poets and patriots. We only need to mention Senator W.B. Yeats and Senator Brian Friel as two examples of how we respected and listened to the voice of artists in formulating policy in the political sphere. There was a tradition and knowledge and an understanding in our nation-building programme between the left and right-brain thinking of citizens in Ireland. When Sean Lemass became Taoiseach, he was asked by, I think, the clerk of the Dáil at the time, who should paint his portrait. And there was a list, and Sean Lemass looked at the list of the four names, and he went, MacGonagall is not on that list. Maurice McGonagall is my grandfather as a portrait. McGonagall's on the list. And so, well, McGonagall is not really a part of the current kind of good artists. Myself and McGonagall were in Ballykinler together. He's painting my portrait. And that portrait is in Tachtline or Leinster House to this day. Something happened to that relationship between the artist and the state, between culture and politics, between creativity and economics. From the era of Lemass and Whittaker and Thomas Kinsella to today, culture and creativity has been marginalised from the consciousness and process of policy making. We might still revere our artists, we might still share in the success of them, but in my view, the artists, in terms of formulating new thinking, formulating policy and engaging with the state, has been marginalised. We became more interested in the framework of partnership and agreements rather than the content of imagination and big picture. I witnessed ugly scenes where tourism officials were demanding arts events to be tailored for increasing bed nights rather than trusting the artist to engage with a citizen, whereby the bed night would be filled anyway. A meanness and a narrow-mindedness appeared whereby the pursuit of new ideas and innovations was not considered unless it was taken for short-term financial gain. Every artist I know is an active citizen who votes and has made a commitment to enrich our society. Yet with every economic bad news, the arts are pitted against teachers, nurses and hospital closures. It is not an either-or scenario, but a requirement for policymakers and politicians to provide an overview of society and to involve all of us in the solution. Culture and creativity is not an optional extra, but an elemental part of our society, and it is what distinguishes us from Ireland Inc. We are a republic and not a corporation, and it is the right that artists should contribute to the rebuilding of our society over the next 5 to 10 years. The sad joke about the recent appointment of the task force on the smart economy that we heard about under the auspices of the Department of Taoiseach is that not one artist, architect, urban designer or philosopher is included in this. This will not happen in France, and it will not happen in the UK, and certainly will not happen in the US. Where does the task force think innovation, content and the creative industries will come from? Somewhere along the line, I was never in this illustrious hostelry, but maybe Joe was. Groom's Hotel. Groom's Hotel was a bar and hotel in Parnell Square where artists, writers, actors, politicians, I believe Don O'Malley was one of its informal chairmen, and there were long debates about nation building, long debates about where the Republic was going, long debates about policy making. And perhaps even Charles Hoy was there, and that formative influence with Charles Hoy in terms of his relationship with artists began in Groom's Hotel. And there was a sense, I certainly remember my father talking about it and my grandfather, there was a sense where a politician, a soldier, an artist were absolutely together trying to work on how to rebuild and enhance our society. Something happened between Groom's Hotel as people walked out, and over the decades as people walked down O'Connell Street. The politicians went to Daithí Nesbitt's and the artists went to the Flowing Tide. And we need to try and re-engage them at some point. A schism has occurred, in my view, unlike France, unlike the UK, where when Tony Benn was elected, artists and singers and musicians were celebrating the night of his election, unlike the US, where Barack Obama and Michelle Obama celebrated with artists. I would love to see any of our Taoiseach in the future surrounded by the poets and the artists who are committed to a shared vision of Ireland. Can we name more than a handful of Oireachtas members who have expressed a public affiliation to the arts? Minister, you are an exception to this, Martin is, and I Tom Murphy, in his brilliant play, The Last Days of a Reluctant Tyrant, wrote the obituary of the Celtic Tiger and reminded us that the greasy till moved from the shop to the bank. He put it all down to the lack of imagination and inquisitiveness, the word awe. What one of his characters said is so apt. Once the people lose a sense of awe, they turn to property and religion. This is a devastating indictment on the economic and social history of Ireland. The panic by short-sighted policymakers to control the education system and concentrate on IT skills one year, science the next year, entrepreneurship the following year, yet downgrade the teaching of languages and history and art. Where do we think a culture of innovation, creativity and the bedrock of the smart economy will emerge? If our young citizens cannot assimilate a poem or view a painting or see a play, how will our left and right brain collude and collide so that our citizens become innovators and not consumers? Creativity can inform and enhance innovation. And there's a recent report published in June of this year by the European Commission on the impact of culture on creativity, which explores how it can nurture innovation and go beyond artistic achievement to create a positive impact on the economy. I can think of gaming, games, technology, digital technology, all interactive and social networking that we need content for. We can provide the content if we continue to invest in education. The Abbey recently published an economic impact study which illustrated that over 3 years, 2006 to 2008, we contributed €118 million to the Irish economy. The exchange of knowledge should not be considered as a financial exchange in itself. A society is more than an economy. Arts and culture is not about fixing social ills or attracting tourism, although they are positive spin-offs. But we can learn from artists and playwrights so that long-term and strategic thinking can be inculcated into the problem-solving of our policymakers and politicians. It takes 3-4 years to write a play, a really good play. It will take us 3 to 7 years to get out, perhaps, out of the current crisis. That's what we need to think about. We need to think about the medium to long term, and artists can teach us about that, and teach us about patience, and can teach us about strategic thinking. The impulse at the moment is to take short-term measures and what Professor Michael Cronin called the tyranny of the moment. The Department of Finance and the Irish Government have to move beyond the unsustainable attention deficit disorder of financial and political fixes. Look at the Irish Permanent TSB decision on the interest rates today, for example. The citizen has to reassert itself. The McCarthy report is waiting to be absorbed as government policy. We in the arts world well understand what cutbacks do. They are done indiscriminately and without a view of the holistic health of society. That is what the proclamation promised, and that is what we are looking for. a new ideology or vision from our politicians which is not about being on Animal Farm and the survival of the fittest. We want to regain control of the act of citizenship through our culture and creativity and not through NAMA. I will finish with an excerpt from Professor Michael Cronin's recent essay in the Journal of Music in Ireland. This man should be on the task force on smart economy. Quote, "Our problem is that current models of governance and economic activity are overwhelmingly skewed towards short-term benefits and gains, so we find ourselves constantly unable to adequately address the major economic and political issues of our time. We also, as a consequence, devalue arts practices in our schools, on our media, and in our public sphere. Instead of the culture of me right now, we ought to be moving to a culture of all of us, all the time. This means that planning practices would be about preserving options for the future. Our culture would honour and reward long-term responsible behaviour, and our arts policies would favour ambitious, sustainable projects over the ephemeral glitz of vox pop. The one thing we know about the future is that we're all in it together. Thinking long-term means engaging the collective good of the species over the self-interest of individual members. Thinking long-term also involves the kind of joined-up thinking that sees a structural link between what might seem like a peripheral issue of arts funding and headline topics such as survival of the planet. The greatest challenge for Irish society in the years ahead is how we answer the question put by one of the architects of the Clock of the Long Now, Stuart Brand. How do we make long-term thinking automatic and common instead of difficult and rare? One answer is to look to, not away from the arts. Gormagh.